Ever since I started making YouTube videos last year, I've focused a lot more on developing my videography skills. Being new to the world of creating video content presented a new challenge: color grading. At the beginning I found color grading confusing. I didn't know where to start and it felt like I had to learn a whole bunch of new and overwhelming information. By no means am I a professional colorist, and so you might be wondering, why should I listen to this guy talk about color grading? Well, I've been recently given access to a really cool plugin called Dehancer. Dehancer has been really useful for me in helping speed up my color grading process, as it provides a number of different film emulations alongside loads of other creative tools that you can use to give your footage a variety of stylized and filmic looks. A couple of weeks ago, Dehancer got in touch with me and asked me to do a video review in exchange for access to their plugins. By no means have they told me what to say, they've just asked for an honest review. So I'm going to show you how I've incorporated Dehancer into my editing workflow, and I'm going to talk about the tools that I find beneficial within Dehancer. And if you want to purchase any Dehancer products, you can do so using the code JAITHWAY, which will get you 10% off everything on the Dehancer website. Okay, so we're just starting off here in Premiere Pro, and this is where you would find Dehancer under Video Effects, Film Emulation. And then once you have Dehancer dragged onto your clip, you will come into Effects Controls. So there's quite a lot of things here that you can do within Dehancer. I'm not using all of them. I'm just going to show you the ones which I have applied to this clip. So this is the log footage without Dehancer applied. This is the grade that I've applied to this clip using Dehancer. So something that I really like about Dehancer is that you can come in here and choose the camera that you were shooting on. So for me, I would go to source, choose camera. I was shooting on the Sony FX30, S-Log3, Cine ISO 800. And the next thing I've done on this clip is come to exposure control because the clip was quite bright. The next thing I've done is actually almost maxed out the temperature control for this clip. It does look quite good around the 60 to 70 range. However, I quite wanted to have that really punchy, almost kind of like sunset dreamy look for this clip. And also when I was shooting that clip, I did have my temperature control in the camera set to about 4,300 Kelvin. So it was a little bit cool for the temperature of the scene. The next thing I've done is come into tint compensation and put that to around 72. That's just added in a really nice kind of magenta tinge to the image, which works quite well with the way the sun was. So I think this is where Dehancer gets really interesting. You can come and choose a profile under film, and there's all of these color film profiles to choose from. There are a few black and white ones in there as well. So for this clip, I found that the Kodak Vision 3 200T film emulation worked really nicely. I haven't tried every film emulation profile in here. I think there's so many to choose from that it can be a little bit overwhelming. But they're really fun to play around with. Some of them are definitely more usable than others. I've found that I have picked out a few favourites. I quite like using the Cine Still 50D. I've enjoyed using the Kodak Vision 3 200T. And also I found the Konica Impressive 50 expired 2006 as a really nice starting point for a lot of the clips that I've been editing. Next thing here is the push-pull EV slider for the film profile. I think this is a really cool tool to kind of get different looks within different film emulations. So for me, I've set this all the way to 2.0 to the right, which kind of gives the image a more yellowy pink kind of tone. Anywhere further to the left is a more cool tone. Next thing down is Film Developer, and I found this to be one of the most powerful tools within Dehancer. So you can come here and change the contrast. There's a contrast boost slider, and I've got this set to about 58. Default is 0, but I've got this set to about 58, and I think that just brings out a really nice kind of punch in the blacks. Something else that I found really useful in the Film Developer tool is the color boost setting. This is a really powerful setting which can kind of easily be overdone if you push it a little bit too far. For this clip I've got it set to 58, so kind of not too strong, but adding in quite a lot of saturation into the image. Next thing is film compression. I have this enabled, but I haven't actually changed any of the settings. But you can see that it kind of just brings up the highlights in the image and gives it a little bit more brightness. But again, here you can come and change the white point, which takes down a lot of the harsh whites of the image. for this clip I've just left that standard. Next thing along here is expand, and here I've come and changed the black point of the image. If I just reset that, you'll be able to see the difference. So it adds in a lot of contrast, and I find that using the black point under expand works quite well with using the contrast boost under film developer. You kind of just have to mess around with those two settings. But yeah, they're both quite powerful settings, so you kind of just need to use them both sparingly. And that's something that I would say about my experience of using Dehancer generally, is that a lot of the effects can become quite overwhelming and quite overpowering quite quickly. Dehancer does tend to have some default settings which come on quite strong. So I find a lot of the time I'm kind of detuning some of the settings, and I've just found that it's about using it sparingly, and also it very much depends on the clip that you're working with. So next thing for this clip, I've skipped over print, we'll come back to that. I've gone into color head and I've changed the yellow blue setting to -13 just to add in a little bit more yellow tone to the image. Again, I've kind of done the same thing with the shadow tone and mid-tone tone settings. So again, just adding in a little bit more golden hour color kind of saturation. For this clip, I haven't added in any film grain. Again, we'll come back to that. But I have added in halation, which is definitely one of the most popular effects that people use when they're trying to achieve some kind of film look. This is a setting which easily can be overdone, but there's a few different settings you can play with here, and then you can go into custom, and it opens up custom settings where you can change various different aspects of the halation as you wish. So it's a very powerful setting with a lot of different customization. I generally find I quite like to use 35mm, Super 35 or 65mm, 65mm, 70mm, as those effects aren't too strong and generally don't overpower the kind of highlights and the bright areas of the image. And I also find the halation setting does add a general kind of warmth to the image. So if I toggle it off and on here again, you'll be able to see a very subtle difference. If you look in the kind of bright areas of the image, you'll see that it gives it a little bit of a warm glow, which I find really aesthetically appealing without being too kind of intense. Next thing down here is bloom, and the same kind of thing applies. I generally set it to the weakest setting. That's also because when I film outdoors, I'm usually using the Polar Pro Peter McKinnon variable ND filter, which also has a mist effect on the filter. So I already have a little bit of bloom, so I feel like I don't need to add in much of that. But it kind of just takes that harsh digital edge off of the highlights. But yeah, that's kind of it for this clip in terms of what I've used. I haven't changed any film damage, film breath, gate weave, overscan, vignette. I generally don't find those settings to be massively useful for me. I feel like they're not really settings that I would use across all of my clips. I'd probably use them quite sparingly if I was going for a specific effect, or if I was putting in a clip that was maybe just a sort of transition to give it like a really overly intense kind of filmic look. Film damage is quite an intense effect. It adds a lot of grain and cuts and dirt to the image, which are supposed to emulate a really kind of like dirty raw film, and how you would have like bits of hair and scratches and everything on the image. So I generally find that's not something I would really use, but it is cool that it's there if you want it, if you want to have a really kind of like over exaggerated film kind of grain or damage basically to the image. So this next clip is a clip of my friend Q shooting on his Hasselblad X2D, and I was just kind of getting some B-roll, filming him, and I'm just going to talk you through the settings. Again, came into source, choose camera, same settings, same camera, FX30, S-Log3, ISO 800. I didn't need to change the exposure compensation on this clip, I was happy with the exposure. Temperature, I've ramped that up a little bit just to warm it up again, but I've kind of tried to go for a more cool kind of blue tone to this image. Tint compensation, popped that up a little bit, and the film I went for Cinestill 50D, which is a film with naturally quite a cool tone, so it really matches what I was kind of going for with this clip. Push-pull, I've set that to 0.7, which has actually kind of warmed up the highlights a little bit, it seems like. So if we just toggle that off and on there, you'll be able to see the difference. I think it adds just a really nice, subtle layer of warmth to the image. Again, I've come down to Film Developer and Contrast Boost. I've put that up a little bit. Color Boost, I've put that up to 78, but again, I quite like how intense that's made the saturation. I think that's quite a pleasing look. I have pushed it quite far, but I think for this clip, it looks quite nice actually. So for film compression, I've just come in and changed the impact a little bit. The rest of these I've just left as standard. Expand, I've just come and changed the black point a little bit, just increase that to again give the image a little bit more contrast. Print, I've just left that profile standard. You do have other print film color spaces here that you can change. I've just left it standard. But what I have done is click on the analog range limiter, which kind of just takes out that complete deep black from the image, and it gives it that kind of filmic crushed black look. And it also takes a little bit of the harshness off of the highlights. If you look just there in the clouds, you'll be able to see that that's quite a bright white. That just like softens the highlights a little bit. So again, that's quite a powerful tool that you can use to just take away that digital kind of look if you're trying to go for a really filmy kind of vibe from your color grading. So what I have done for these two clips here is just enable a little bit of film grain. So I hadn't done that on the last clip over here, but I've just enabled the 65mm ISO 250. I find that to be quite a pleasing amount of grain without being too intense. I do find the other film grain settings to be quite overpowering for the image, but I find with this one it's quite satisfying actually. You can see it more clearly sort of in the highlights of the image around here. But I found that to be a really pleasing amount of grain to use. Halation I've enabled on 35mm Super 35. If you look in more so the sort of highlights of the image, like it's really noticeable on the lens filter here, and sort of in the bright areas of highlights. I do like that to be quite a subtle effect, but yeah, I do find that to be a really pleasing amount of halation to use. It's not too overpowering, and I do think it adds quite a lot to the way that the clip looks. So I've just opened up a clip here in Davinci Resolve, and straight away you can see how much nicer Dehancer is to use in this program. It just feels a lot more intuitive. The menus are much easier to access, and the sliders are much more visible. You don't have to like click to open them and then click again like you do in Premiere Pro, which just becomes really annoying and it just looks really messy. But again, that's more of just an issue of that program. So for this clip, I've just gone into choose camera, Sony, FX30, all of this again, blah, 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 ISO 800. And I've gone and chosen the Konica Impresa 50 Expired 2006 film emulation, which I was talking about earlier as kind of one of my favorite ones to use. So in this clip, I did go into print film and I chose the Fujifilm 3513 print film, and then just messed around with a few of the settings here, toggled on the analog range limiter, which is especially noticeable if you look in the highlights of the image here, and then also in the blue shadows here. If I toggle that on, it just brings the highlights down a little bit, brings the shadows up a little bit. So then after that, I've gone back up to the film developer, changed some settings here, down to film compression, I've changed some settings here. I've gone to expand. So just a little bit of a different workflow for this clip. Generally, I find it's kind of just trial and error, sort of working out an order of settings that you like. I would say if you are going to use the print film, to apply that at the kind of the beginning of like your grading process for each clip, just because that does change the color profiles quite drastically. This clip I've left the color head alone. I've added in a custom film grain profile, which I think I was basing off one of the 65mm grains. So for halation for this clip, I've added the 8mm Super 8, but then I've brought down the amplify setting quite drastically just to bring that effect down. Bloom I've left alone. Film damage, I've just left. These are the settings I've put on for film breath. Again, quite a subtle change. And then I've left gate weave, overscan, all of these things I generally just don't really touch. So yeah, that's how that clip's come out. I think it looks really great. I think it has a really nice amount of contrast. I think the colours look really good. And so it is quite powerful, the amount of changes that you can make just using Dehancer. So just to say for this clip as well, I have adjusted some settings in the high dynamic range colour wheels. I've just adjusted some of the shadow tone settings very slightly, which has just helped a bit when using Dehancer. So I also just thought I'd show you quickly how Dehancer works on iOS. So I've got the Dehancer app here. I just loaded up an iPhone video, and it is kind of struggling again with playback, so maybe that's an issue on the phone app as well, that it's quite heavy duty, quite heavy processing. But yeah, I've just loaded in an iPhone clip here. I've just set it to Rec 709, and I've chosen pretty much the first film that's come up, the Africa Chrome RSX 200. And I do think this looks quite good. I've just basically brought the white point up because it was kind of clipping out a lot of the highlights back this way. So I've brought that forward a little bit. But I'm kind of just leaving all of these other settings. It seems to have done a kind of bunch of like automatic settings, which I'm not mad about. I think it looks quite good. So just quickly looking at this, I think it looks really nice. It's just a shame it can't seem to play back a little bit smoother. In terms of which phone I'm using, this is the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So maybe if you have an iPhone 15 or 16, it will probably perform a little bit better. But it's pretty cool that you can come on here, mess around with all of the same kind of settings. And if you did have a clip that you imported from your camera to your phone, you do still have all of these camera profiles. And they also have settings for the log profiles that Apple phones have now. But yeah, it seems like the app is organized really nicely with all of these different windows. I would say that it's very intuitive to use. It is nice to know that I can bring an iPhone video in here and just do a quick bunch of edits if I wanted to chuck that up onto an Instagram story or something. So I have really enjoyed using Dehancer. I definitely will keep using it. I think it's a really powerful plugin, and the amount of different things that you can do with it is seemingly kind of endless. I think it's so useful to have different color profiles that you can apply to different cameras, different camera log settings. For me, I mainly film on the Sony FX30, the Fuji X-T5, and the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. So you have color profiles for all of those cameras. And I think a lot of the effects are extremely useful. I think for me personally, not all of them are extremely useful. I think some of them I generally just don't really touch. I don't really want to be overdoing it with my clips and adding in too much kind of film damage or grain or things that will make the image kind of look quite heavily processed. I mean, it is cool that those options are there, but I think for me personally, I quite like to have more of a kind of subtle film look. That's just my preference. And I do think sometimes a lot of the base settings that Dehancer puts on your clip when you hit enable on each of these different windows are quite intense, but obviously you can just reduce them. I find a lot of the time I'm reducing a lot of the effects. But yeah, I'm definitely going to keep using Dehancer. I think it's really fun messing around with a lot of the different film emulations, and there's so many that you can go through and play around with, and even once you've sort of finished a grade on a clip, you can just go back and change the film profile and then kind of just start again. So sometimes I have been doing that and getting into a bit of an endless loop, but it's just fun to play around with. There's so many different options. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.